The silence that followed the destruction of New Geneva was not the peaceful quiet of space, but the suffocating stillness of death multiplied by 2.3 million souls. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood before the massive viewport of the UES Retribution, her weathered hands pressed against the cold transparistelle as she watched the debris field that had once been humanity's most prosperous outer colony slowly tumble through the void. Twisted metal fragments caught the light of the distant star, each glinting piece a reminder of lives cut short, dreams incinerated, and a civilization's promise reduced to cosmic dust. The attack had come without warning, without provocation, and without mercy. The Keth'mori species humanity had encountered only 18 months prior during what was supposed to be a routine deep space survey mission had emerged from the darkness, between stars like some ancient nightmare made manifest. Their ships, organic-looking behemoths that seemed to breathe and pulse with malevolent life, had surrounded New Geneva's orbital platforms in a matter of minutes. The colony's defense grid, state-of-the-art by human standards, had proven as effective as throwing stones at a hurricane. What haunted Elena most was not the scale of the destruction, but its precision. The Keth'mori hadn't simply obliterated the colony in a fit of alien rage. They had methodically dismantled it, starting with the orbital shipyards, then the defensive stations, then the residential sectors. The attack had been broadcast across the colony's communication networks, forcing families to watch their neighbors die before their own turn came. It was psychological warfare of the most cruel and calculating kind, and it had worked exactly as intended. The news had reached Earth 3 days later, carried by a single automated probe that had somehow escaped the carnage. Within hours, every human world from the core systems to the frontier settlements had erupted in a fury that transcended politics, religion, and the countless petty divisions that had plagued humanity for millennia. The Galactic Senate had dissolved itself in an emergency session, transferring absolute authority to the newly formed War Council. Colonial militias had abandoned their posts to join the gathering fleet. Corporate security forces had handed over their ships and weapons. Even the notorious Outer Rim pirates had pledged their vessels to the cause. The mobilization had been unlike anything in human history. Within 6 months, nearly 900,000 warships had assembled in the Sol system, creating a fleet so vast that it literally blocked out sections of the stars when viewed from Earth's surface. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying, a river of lights stretching from Mercury's orbit to beyond the asteroid belt, each point of light representing hundreds or thousands of human lives dedicated to a single purpose. Vengeance. Elena had been chosen to lead this unprecedented armada not because of her tactical brilliance, though she possessed that in abundance, but because she had lost everything at New Geneva. Her daughter Sarah had been working as a terraforming engineer on the colony's third moon. Her son Marcus had been serving aboard the defense platform that had been the first target destroyed. Her ex-husband David, despite their bitter divorce, had been there visiting their grandchildren. The Keth'mori had taken her entire family in the span of 2 hours, leaving her with nothing but the cold comfort of command and the promise of retribution. The fleet represented every aspect of human civilization. Sleek Navy dreadnoughts bristling with railguns and plasma batteries flew alongside converted freighters loaded with nuclear missiles. Corporate security vessels with their polished hulls shared formation with ramshackle colonial defense ships held together by spare parts and determination. The diversity was staggering. Ships from Mars, Europa, Titan, and hundreds of other worlds, each crew speaking different languages, following different customs, but united by a grief so profound it had become a living thing. As Elena watched the debris field of New Geneva drift past, she thought about the intelligence reports that had been flooding in from across human space. The Keth'mori were not some primitive alien species, lashing out in fear or confusion. They were an ancient civilization, one that had apparently been watching humanity's expansion with growing alarm. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything humans had developed, their ships capable of traveling between stars in ways that made human FTL drives look like children's toys. But the Keth'mori had made one crucial mistake in their calculated destruction of New Geneva. They had assumed that humans would respond like any other species they had encountered, with fear, with surrender, with the rational calculation that resistance against a superior force was futile. They had not understood that humans possessed something that their cold, logical minds could not comprehend: the ability to choose certain destruction over accepting injustice. The communication came through the fleet's quantum entanglement network. At 03:07 hours, ship time, Elena was in her quarters, staring at a holographic image of her family taken during their last reunion. When her aide knocked on the door, the message was brief, transmitted on an open channel that every ship in the fleet could receive. "We are the Keth'mori. Your colony was destroyed as a lesson. Submit, and your species will be permitted to exist under our guidance. Resist, and you will join your dead in the void." Elena's response was transmitted fleet-wide 30 seconds later, her voice carrying across 900,000 ships with the weight of absolute conviction. "We are humanity. We do not submit. We do not surrender. We do not forget. You wanted to teach us a lesson about power. Now we will teach you one about consequences." The stars themselves seemed to pulse with anticipation as nearly 1,000,000 human warships began their burn toward the coordinates where the Keth'mori fleet waited. The darkness between the stars had never seemed so absolute, but it was about to be shattered by the fury of a species that had learned, in the most brutal way possible, what it truly meant to be human. The journey to the Keth'mori staging ground took 17 days through the twisted corridors of hyperspace. 17 days during which Elena discovered that commanding humanity's largest military force was like trying to shepherd a hurricane. The cultural tensions that had been suppressed by grief and rage began to surface as the fleet traveled deeper into uncharted space. Martian crews, with their rigid military discipline, clashed with the freewheeling tactics of the asteroid belt. Miners, the corporate security forces, accustomed to protecting profits, struggled to adapt to the total war mentality of the colonial militias who had lost everything. But it was during the 10th day that Elena received a communication that would shatter everything she thought she knew about the war. The message came through an encrypted channel that predated the destruction of New Geneva, transmitted on a frequency that should have been impossible for anyone to access. The voice that spoke was hauntingly familiar, yet impossibly distant. "Elena, it's Sarah. I'm alive, but I'm not where you think I am." Elena's hands trembled as she recognized her daughter's voice, the same voice that had called her mom for the last time 3 months ago. But this wasn't a recording or some cruel Keth'mori trick. The transmission was coming from within the alien fleet itself, carried on quantum frequencies that suggested technology far beyond what either species possessed. "The Keth'mori didn't just destroy New Geneva," Sarah's voice continued, distorted by layers of interference that seemed to bend reality itself. They pulled us somewhere else, somewhere between dimensions. We're all here, Mom. All 2.3 million of us. We're trapped in a space that exists parallel to this universe, and the Keth'mori are using us as a bridge." The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Her daughter wasn't dead, none of them were. The Keth'mori had somehow displaced the entire population of New Geneva into a dimensional pocket, turning them into unwilling anchors for technology that allowed the aliens to phase between realities. It explained how the Keth'mori ships had appeared so suddenly, how they had been able to strike without warning. They were using humanity's own people as a gateway between worlds. Dr. Nakamura's analysis of the transmission confirmed Elena's worst fears and greatest hopes. The quantum signature was unlike anything in known physics, suggesting that the Keth'mori possessed technology that could manipulate the fundamental structure of spacetime itself. But more importantly, the fact that Sarah could communicate meant that the displaced humans retained their consciousness, their memories, their essential humanity even in their interdimensional prison. The discovery transformed the entire nature of the war. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore, it was about rescue. Elena called an emergency meeting of the fleet commanders, her voice hoarse with emotion as she explained the situation. "They're not dead. Our people are alive, trapped in some kind of dimensional cage. We're not just fighting to avenge them, we're fighting to bring them home." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Captain Torres of the Luna Defense Force spoke for many when he said, "Then we don't just need to destroy the Keth'mori fleet. We need to capture their technology, learn how to reverse what they've done." The tactical situation had suddenly become infinitely more complex. They couldn't simply annihilate their enemies. They needed to defeat them while preserving the very systems that held their loved ones captive. But Sarah's message contained more than just revelation. It contained intelligence that would prove crucial to the coming battle. "We can see them from here, Mom. All of them. The Keth'mori aren't just one species, they're a collective of dozens of races, all of them trapped in the same dimensional space we are. They were conquered just like us, their populations displaced and enslaved. The entities controlling the ships aren't the original Keth'mori. They're something else, something that feeds on the life force of entire civilizations." The truth was more terrifying than Elena had imagined. The Keth'mori ships were operated by ancient parasitic entities that had been consuming species after species for millennia, using their victims' own dimensional essence as fuel for their technology. The beautiful organic ships weren't alien vessels, they were living prisons, each one containing the displaced population of an entire world. As the fleet prepared to drop out of hyperspace, Elena found herself facing an impossible choice. To rescue the people of New Geneva, she would need to capture at least one Keth'mori vessel intact, which would require sacrificing thousands of her own people in a precision assault that had virtually no chance of success. But if she failed, not only would the displaced humans remain trapped forever, but the parasitic entities would continue their harvest until every sentient species in the galaxy had been consumed. The decision came during the 15th day, when Sarah's transmissions began to weaken. "They're moving us deeper into the dimensional space, Mom, further from our reality. If you don't reach us soon, we'll be lost forever. But there's something else we've been learning: to manipulate the dimensional barriers from this side. If you can get close enough to one of their ships, we can create a breach, a way back to our universe. But it has to be a coordinated effort. We can only hold the breach open for minutes." Elena realized that her daughter and the other displaced humans had become unwitting experts in the very technology that imprisoned them. They had spent 3 months learning to navigate dimensional space, developing skills that could prove crucial to the rescue mission, but it would require a level of coordination and timing that bordered on the impossible. The final piece of the puzzle came when Elena received a transmission from an unexpected source. The message was brief, transmitted on the same quantum frequency as Sarah's communications, but the voice was alien, ancient, and weary. Speaking in heavily accented English, "Human fleet, we are the true Keth'mori. We have been prisoners for 10,000 years. Your daughter speaks truth. Help us reclaim our bodies, and we will help you reclaim your people." The parasites fear only one thing: the severing of their connection to the dimensional space. Destroy the anchor points, and we can all return to our proper reality. Elena stared at the tactical display as the implications sank in. She wasn't just fighting to rescue New Geneva's population. She was fighting to liberate an entire galaxy's worth of enslaved species. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, but it also filled her with a determination that transcended mere human emotion. This was no longer about revenge or even rescue. This was about breaking chains that had bound the galaxy for millennia. When the fleet finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Keth'mori system, they found themselves facing not just an alien armada, but a graveyard of civilizations. Each ship represented a dead world, a consumed species, a story of conquest and enslavement that stretched back to the dawn of galactic civilization. But Elena saw something else in those organic vessels. She saw prisons that could be broken, chains that could be severed, and souls that could be freed. The final transmission from the parasitic entities came as both fleets moved into attack position, their synthetic voices carrying across the void with artificial calm. "You will join your people. In the dimensional space, humans, your flesh will fuel our ships. Your minds will serve our purposes. Resistance is futile." Elena's response was transmitted simultaneously to both fleets, human and alien alike, her words carrying the weight of every species that had ever been enslaved. "You've been feeding on fear for 10,000 years, but you've never tasted human defiance. We don't just fight for our own people, we fight for every soul you've stolen." Every world you've consumed, today, the feast ends. The battle began not with the thunderous roar of weapons, fire, but with something far more unsettling: silence. For 17 minutes, the two fleets hung in the void like opposing storms, each waiting for the other to make the first move. Elena used those precious minutes to listen to the intercepted Keth'mori communications, her translation software, working frantically to decode the alien language. What she heard made her blood run cold. The Keth'mori were not preparing for battle. They were preparing for harvest. Through the stolen voices of New Geneva's dead, Elena learned that the Keth'mori had never intended to destroy the human fleet. They had lured humanity's greatest armada to this remote system for the same reason. They had destroyed the colony to collect the minds of nearly 1 million humans in a single, devastating stroke. The alien ships weren't just warships, they were mobile processing facilities, each one equipped with the neural harvesting technology that had consumed New Geneva's population. The revelation struck Elena like a physical blow. The Keth'mori had been counting on humanity's predictable response to the colony's destruction. They had calculated that humans would gather their largest possible force for revenge, making the harvest exponentially more efficient. Every ship in Elena's fleet represented not just military assets, but millions of minds that the Keth'mori intended to add to their vast biological network. But as Elena processed this horrifying intelligence, she realized that the Keth'mori had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed that learning about their true intentions would break human morale, that the crews would flee rather than face a fate worse than death. Instead, the knowledge that their enemy intended to enslave their consciousness ignited a fury that transcended rational thought. Across the fleet, Elena watched as ship after ship began broadcasting the same message: "We choose the void." The phrase spread through the human armada like wildfire. "We choose the void" became the rallying cry of crews who would rather die in nuclear fire than become unwilling servants of their enemies. Engineers began rigging their ships' reactors for catastrophic overload. Weapons officers programmed their missiles to detonate if captured. Medical officers distributed suicide pills that would destroy brain tissue before the harvesting process could begin. The Keth'mori, monitoring these preparations through their stolen human minds, began to show something Elena had never expected to see from such an advanced species: panic. Their communications became frantic as they realized that their primary strategic advantage, the threat of mental enslavement, had backfired spectacularly. The humans weren't just willing to die. They were eager to deny their enemies the prize they had come to claim. It was then that Elena received the message that would change everything. The transmission came through a quantum channel she had never seen before, encrypted with codes that predated the war by decades. The voice that spoke was weak, distorted by layers of alien interference, but unmistakably human. "Admiral, this is Captain David Chen of the exploration vessel Prometheus. We've been prisoners for 3 years. New Geneva wasn't their first harvest. There are 17 human colonies. 17 colonies you never knew existed. We're all here, Admiral. All of us. Trapped in their network." The implications hit Elena like a meteor strike. The Keth'mori hadn't just been observing humanity's expansion, they had been secretly harvesting human colonies for years, taking entire populations that had ventured too far into unexplored space. The people of New Geneva weren't just victims. They were the latest additions to a vast collection of human consciousness that the Keth'mori had been accumulating like some twisted library of souls. But David Chen's message contained more than just revelation. It contained hope. "We've been working, Admiral, all of us. Every human mind they've stolen has been fighting back from the inside. We've learned how to disrupt their network, how to turn their own systems against them. But we need a signal from the outside. We need you to transmit on frequency 847.3, synchronized with your attack. We can bring down their defenses, but only if you can reach the consensus." Elena's mind raced as she processed this information. The Keth'mori's greatest weapon, their network of harvested minds, could become their greatest weakness if the enslaved humans could coordinate their rebellion. But it would require a sacrifice that went beyond anything she had already planned. To reach the consensus, the human fleet would have to punch through the entire Keth'mori defense network, and there was no guarantee that any of them would survive the journey. The decision came easier than Elena had expected. She activated the fleet-wide communication system, her voice carrying to every ship in the armada. All ships, this is Admiral Vasquez. I have new intelligence about our enemy and our mission. The Keth'mori have been harvesting human colonies. For years, our people are alive, trapped in their network, and they're fighting back. We have one chance to free them, but it will require everything we have. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ship after ship reported ready status, their crews volunteering for what they all knew would be a suicide mission. Elena watched as her tactical display filled with green lights, each one representing a crew that had chosen to risk everything for the chance to free the souls of their fellow humans. The attack began at 13:47 hours, ship time. The spear formation, led by the fastest human vessels, accelerated toward the Keth'mori lines at a significant fraction of light speed. The alien fleet responded with weapons that seemed to bend reality itself, beams of energy that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, creating wounds in spacetime that swallowed entire ships whole. But for every human vessel that vanished into the dimensional rifts, two more took its place, their crews screaming defiance as they charged into the impossible. The shield formation absorbed the Keth'mori counterattack with a stoicism that would have made ancient Spartans proud. Massive dreadnoughts and converted cargo haulers alike disappeared under the alien weapons' fire, their hulls peeling away like flower petals in a hurricane. But they held their positions, creating a protective barrier that allowed the sword formation to begin its final approach. Elena watched from the bridge of her flagship as the battle unfolded around her hands steady on the controls as she guided her ship through the chaos. The Keth'mori were fighting with the desperation of a species that had suddenly realized they were not the apex predators they had believed themselves to be. Their organic ships twisted and writhed like living things in pain, their bioluminescent patterns flickering with what Elena could only interpret as fear. The breakthrough came when the first human ships reached the Keth'mori command vessel, a massive structure that pulsed with the stolen thoughts of 1,000,000 enslaved minds. Elena transmitted on frequency 847.3, her signal carrying a single word that would resonate through the alien network: freedom. The response was immediate and devastating. Across the Keth'mori fleet, systems began failing as the harvested human minds turned against their captors. Ships lost power, weapons misfired, and communication networks collapsed as 3 years of suppressed rage found its outlet. The Keth'mori had created their own destruction by underestimating the one thing that no technology could replicate: the human refusal to accept defeat, even in death. The moment the enslaved minds began their rebellion, reality itself seemed to shudder. Elena watched in awe as the Keth'mori ships, those beautiful organic vessels that had seemed so invincible, began to convulse and writhe like dying animals. But what she witnessed next defied everything she thought she knew about the nature of existence itself. The ships weren't just malfunctioning, they were transforming, their organic hulls peeling away to reveal the true horror beneath. Each vessel contained not just harvested minds, but the actual physical bodies of entire civilizations, suspended in a crystalline matrix that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that human science couldn't begin to comprehend. As the mental rebellion spread through the alien network, the dimensional barriers began to collapse, and Elena could see the faces of billions of beings, humans, but also countless other species trapped in a state between life and death. The first breakthrough came when the UES retribution sensors detected a massive energy spike from the largest Keth'mori vessel. Through the chaos of battle, Elena heard Sarah's voice again, but this time it was different, stronger, more focused, carrying an authority that spoke of 3 months spent learning to navigate impossible realities. "Mom, we've found the control nexus. The parasites aren't just controlling the ships, they're controlling the dimensional anchors that keep us trapped. If we can synchronize our rebellion with your attack, we can collapse the entire system." But the cost of that synchronization was becoming horrifyingly clear. As the dimensional barriers weakened, Elena could see the true nature of the parasitic entities that had been masquerading as the Keth'mori. They weren't physical beings at all. but vast networks of consciousness that existed in the spaces between realities, feeding on the life force of entire species. By trapping them in dimensional prisons, the beautiful ships were just the visible manifestation of a hunger that had been consuming the galaxy for millions of years. The revelation came with a price that Elena hadn't anticipated. As the dimensional barriers collapsed, the displaced populations began to phase back into normal space, but not all of them were returning to their original forms. 3 months of existence in interdimensional space had changed them in ways that human science couldn't explain. Some of the returning humans possessed abilities that defied physics: telepathic communication, the ability to perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously, and most disturbing of all, the capacity to exist in several realities at once. Elena's tactical display lit up with impossible readings as the battle entered its final phase. The human fleet, reduced to fewer than 200,000 ships by the brutal assault, was now fighting alongside beings that had transcended the normal limitations of three-dimensional existence. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos with an urgency that made Elena's blood run cold. "Mom, the parasites are trying to collapse all the dimensional barriers at once. If they succeed, they'll drag our entire universe into their feeding dimension. You have to destroy the Nexus ships before they complete the process." The final assault required everything Elena had learned about command, sacrifice, and the true nature of human courage. She divided her remaining forces into surgical strike teams, each one targeting a specific Nexus ship, while the returned populations used their newfound abilities to disrupt the parasitic entities' control systems. The battle became a three-dimensional chess game played across multiple realities, with Elena coordinating attacks that existed simultaneously in normal space and in dimensions that her mind could barely comprehend. The turning point came when Elena made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The largest Nexus ship, the one containing the primary control systems, was surrounded by dimensional barriers that no human weapon could penetrate. But Sarah and the other transformed humans could reach it if they were willing to sacrifice their newfound abilities and return fully to three-dimensional existence. "We can do it, Mom." Sarah's voice was calm, carrying the weight of a daughter who had grown up in ways that no parent should have to witness. "But we'll have to burn out our dimensional interfaces to generate enough energy. We won't be able to exist in multiple realities anymore. We'll be normal again, human again." Elena's response came without hesitation, her voice carrying across the quantum channels to every transformed human in the fleet. "Then come home, sweetheart. All of you, come home to us." The final explosion was visible across 3 dimensions simultaneously, a burst of pure energy that severed the parasitic entity's connection to normal space and sent them screaming back into the void between realities. As the last of the Nexus ships collapsed, Elena watched as nearly 3 million humans materialized on the decks of her remaining vessels. Not just the population of New Geneva, but the survivors of 17 colonies that had been consumed over the past 3 years. But the victory came with a revelation that transformed Elena's understanding of humanity's place in the universe. The returned populations brought with them knowledge of dozens of other species that had been trapped in the parasitic entities' dimensional prisons. Some had been enslaved for millennia, their civilizations reduced to batteries for the parasites' interdimensional technology. Others had found ways to resist, maintaining their cultures and identities even in captivity. As Elena stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the rescued populations adapt to their return to normal space, she realized that humanity had inadvertently become the liberators of an entire galaxy. The destruction of the parasitic network had freed not just human colonies, but hundreds of species that had been presumed extinct. The galaxy was about to become a very different place, filled with civilizations that had been shaped by their experience in interdimensional captivity. The final transmission Elena received came from an unexpected source, the original Keth'mori, speaking through communication systems that had been silent for 10,000 years. Their message was simple but profound. The long night is over. The galaxy remembers how to dream again. In the aftermath of the battle, as Elena watched the vast fleet of human and alien vessels begin their journey home, She understood that the war had ended not with conquest, but with liberation. The 900,000 human warships that had darkened the stars had become the light that freed the galaxy from a nightmare that had lasted for millions of years. The price had been terrible, fewer than 200. 0 human ships had survived the final battle, but the victory had been absolute. Elena's final log entry, recorded as the fleet prepared for the long journey back to human space, captured the transformation that had occurred. We came seeking vengeance and found redemption. We came to rescue our dead and discovered they were never truly gone. We came as humans and return as something more, guardians of a galaxy that has remembered what it means to be free. The stars are no longer darkened by our ships, but illuminated by the light of hope we've helped to kindle. The journey home would take months, but Elena knew that they were not returning to the same universe they had left. The galaxy had been reborn, and humanity had played a crucial role in its liberation. The colonies that had been lost were found, the species that had been enslaved were free, and the darkness between the stars had been replaced by the promise of a new age of cooperation and understanding. As the fleet began its burn toward home, Elena looked out at the stars and saw not the cold emptiness of space, but the warm light of countless worlds where beings could once again dream of futures, unburdened by the fear of consumption. The 900,000 human warships had indeed darkened the stars, but only so that the light of freedom could shine all the brighter.